Okay. How are you? Welcome to Outside the Sanctuary. I am Bill Merkh, Steve Entwistle.
Katrina McDonald.
And our guest today is Dr. Marc McCleary. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing all right.
Yeah, thanks for coming. So we're basically talking to Marc because we like Marc. And also, yeah, and that's the end of the podcast. Thanks for coming out. Yeah, peace out.
You wish.
You're writing us checks. I didn't tell you that. But we're talking to you because of your being a doctor, being a physician, doing, we're going to kind of hit you with the whole gamut of your life, why you chose to be a doctor, why you chose, military, why'd you choose Holly, like all that fun stuff. Holly being his wife.
Yes.
So I'm going to start out with a quote, which is by William Osler, which says, a good physician, I can't even speak. A good physician treats the disease. A great physician treats the patient with the disease.
Deep.
So I figure let's go deep.
That's hanging in Mark's office right now.
No, actually, it's a good quote because when I was training, there's a tendency when people are, especially when you're going inpatient, when people are on the floor, that when you're doing rounds in a room a lot of times like this, as a group talking about their patients, to refer to them as their illness. So the pancreatic cancer in 4, or the COPD exacerbation at 3. And it's always a point to say, no. What's their name? Right. Mr. Smith with the pancreatic cancer. Because as soon as you just call them the diagnosis, you dehumanize them. And so that quote, it really does kind of sum up the mistake that people can make, is also that people in front of you become their diagnosis. You forget there's so much more to them.
Right.
It's a good spirit quote.
Have you gotten trapped in that before?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, you can kind of be a little bit, you kind of geek out on some things like, oh my goodness, this is such an interesting case. And forgetting the fact that that's the father, grandfather, son, brother, uncle, like, this person has a life. They're not just this interesting case. Oh, and so, you have to remind yourself sometimes of the humanity, especially because so much of what you do is not directly in front of the patient. Well, you're looking up stuff, you're getting into groups and talking about the person, and sometimes it's easy to forget that you're mad. Yeah. It's like, I'm gonna help them, but I'm also like really interested in this. And so, reminding yourself who the person is super important.
So let's go back into your life, and you guys jump in. Let's. Where do you guys want to start? Katrina.
Well, I asked the first question, how you met Holly.
She's kind of an interesting story. So we met in college freshman year, and it turned out we had the same dentist. Dr. Adams was a dentist in Socket.
Patch?
No, not Patch.
Just check out. She's so hoping.
Really?
And so, anyway, we both had seen him for years. We had never met each other. And I guess I had seen him first right before I went away to school. And he was always asking where he could go to college. And I told him to go for college. But Holly comes in and I guess says the same thing to him. And he's like, hey, I know a guy. He wasn't allowed to say my name, but it was like, I know a guy. He's a Christian. He's going to be going to school there. But he's going to live with his grandmother, which Gettysburg was not a commuter school. So I was one of the rare students who winds up living off campus freshman year. Because my grandmother lived 20 miles away. And so he says, and so I guess Holly kind of said, there's no way to meet this guy. I mean, really live on campus. What are the chances? Well, they did residential learning at Gettysburg. So you come in as freshman, you picked a freshman seminar on a topic that interested you. And that's how you decided where people lived their freshman year. So everybody that picked that seminar was room on the same floor with the idea that you have similar interests. So that's the starting point. And then they had classrooms on the floor, and that's where that class met. Well, we had both picked biotechnology and ethics as our freshman seminar class, and we were both going into medicine. And so the first day of that class, I show up, and it's the only class that's actually in the dorm where everybody's staying, and then there's me. This is a week into it. I haven't moved in. Yeah. So everybody knows it because we're living on the same floor. And the first day of class, they're all like,
yeah, who's this? How'd you get down here?
Who's that guy?
Yeah. So So I introduced myself. I'm like, hi, I'm Marc McCleary. I currently live with my grandmother.
Hi, I'm Marc McCleary.
I live with my grandmom. So after the class, this girl comes up to me. She's like, is Doc Adams your dentist? I'm like,
No way.
some top. And so that's how we met. And then,
That's a great story.
yeah. And so it's kind of a God thing too, because, it was a lot that went into me being raised in a really conservative Christian background. I went to secular college. My dad was a youth pastor at a really conservative church. There was some fallout from that decision. Bet your son go to a secular college. And and so here was some validation, like literally like the first week.
Sure.
You're in the right.
Yes, Bob, you're a Christian dentist. We got the two of you, and we just became friends. And actually, because I was commuting, but I had all day classes, but they weren't like back to back to back. I would sit in my car, eat lunch that I packed, and eventually it was like, hey, why don't you come hang out? And so, and then it was I had a car, so give her rides back here, Brady, stuff like that.
I'm chaperoned, Mark.
Then years later, we were very kind of roommates.
8 years later. So exactly when you finished.
I went in 1 year of medical school left. We had decided I was going to be as close to finishing medical school as possible. And she went to nursing school after college, and she wanted to be debt free before she got married. So we just kind of put everything. So we were 25 when we got married.
So go back farther. What made you want to do medicine? Like, were you like, even as a kid, were you geeking out over medicine, or like, I love going to the doctor? I don't know why I keep doing your voice that way. That's what I hear.
The age-old thing about why do I need a doctor? I want to help, and anyway, there's some legitimacy to that.
Right.
I like science. I was kind of a nerd and always did well in school. I was like, hey, this seems like a cool thing. And then, kind of in a weird way, the show ER came on. And I think it premiered in like 1992. So we're talking about like July into the beginning of high school. And I liked the show. And like it kind of caught my attention. Again, looking back now, it's certainly Hollywood. It's, and a little bit of it. Yeah. But still, like, there was that excitement. And for the longest time, I actually thought it was going to be an ER doc. And you'll probably get this a little later. 9/11 kind of changed that for me living. But yeah, so I mean, it was, and so that caught my attention. And then I just kind of started looking into it through high school. And I really, from the beginning of high school through, I was one of the rare people who said I want to be a doctor. And then, like, just kept coming out with follows this typical course. Some people that started as like pre-med at college and did it. And it wasn't necessarily because it was too hard. It was more like, I don't want to do this. I was like, I think you do. And then you get to go, I don't like the sciences enough to keep with this. All right, you find something else that you find passionate, or you go on this, go that route, And so, yeah, but for me, it was something that got kind of put in my heart at a young age, but then stayed. There's been a couple of times where I went, but smart.
So you graduated college and went straight to medical school?
I took a year off, actually. I was actually going to go and work a year, actually attend World Bible Study for a year, just as a change of pace. And I was accepted. And, most people live in World right out of high school. Right. So I was coming up with as a college graduate. And so I'm not down to tell you what I was saying.
Okay. I'm just saying. I'm giving you the eye.
So I was already going to do it there. And then the school I graduated from, which was Victory Christian in Wichita, it's no longer open, but it was like a rival Kings of Baptist. So
There's also no letter.
The science teacher abruptly resigned like a month before the school year. And I had a biology and chemistry degree. And so they reached out and said, would you be interested in coming in to teach? Because the great thing about Christian school is you don't have to have like an education degree to teach. Read the bones, the subject matter. And I said, okay. And prayed about it. And so I actually taught high school for the year between college and med school. And during that, I applied and so forth. No, I was probably going to be a 1 year thing, but I had a great experience with teaching. I loved the kids. Coached basketball that year. Parents were interesting.
As always.
Yeah, so parents made it a little tricky because that's the church and the school I grew up in.
Yeah.
So to be taken seriously as a teacher when I was like a kid 4 years ago, and all the teachers that were there were my teachers.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so there was a little bit of that.
A little too much like home.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that dynamic. It's funny because the principal, when he hired me, said, my only advice to you is you make the kids call you Mr. McCleary. Because I was actually like good friends with a lot of their older siblings. I mean, because we're only talking, I'm 4 years older than the seniors,
10.
and so he was like, you have, I know that you've always been marked to a lot of these students, like you can't be, and so I thought the students handled it fine. I think, like I said, I think the parents struggle with it a little bit.
Right. Huh.
Yeah.
So then you do medical school. Now, when did you decide to get into the military?
Okay, so
Yeah, give us I'm jumping all over here.
yes,
Let's go a little bit more.
I got to go to medical school interviewing. You have to take the HECAL's medical college admissions test. And as soon as you do that, the military gets notified of people who take the MCAT. And so I had an Army recruiter reach out to me. Hey, have you ever thought about joining the Army? They'll pay for med school. And of course, they made it sound like, it's easy. And I first admitted, no, I'm not. I was living home at the time, talking to my dad, and he was like, you just blow the guy off. He's like, and if you looked at the cost of med school, you're talking back then, this 20 years ago, most people were getting out of there with $300,000 in debt for med school. He's like, get out debt free. I mean, that's pretty. So I called the guy back. I said, hey, let's do lunch. And of course, he's a recruiter, so he's making it sound amazing. And I asked around it, and what he was saying wasn't really that far off. And so I started the process through the Army.
What year is this?
This would have been 2000 into 2001.
Okay.
So fall of 2000.
Fall of 2000.
Yeah.
All right.
And so I was talking to a friend's dad about it, who had been in he had been at a couple of different branches. He was like, hey, don't take this wrong. It's like, I would look at the Air Force. He's like, you're not like a hoorah up guy. And so like, he's like, he's like, if all you're looking is for, the education experience, he's like, Army is Army. It's like those guys are rough and tumble. He was like, that's it. Because I'd never really pictured myself anyway.
Right.
I mean,
I know it's hard to believe.
see. Yeah, the people on YouTube are like,
Told me. All right. You do.
And so I called the Air Force up. So you had to say, yeah, we had the same program. It's a little bit more competitive. I said, okay, I'll apply. So long story short, I got in to the Air Force. I had to make that very awkward call to the Army recruiter because I already dealt my physical everything with the Army. He was legally required to send all the information to the Air Force guy. But that call did not go. But so then I commissioned in the Air Force in March of 2001. And then started med school in August of 2001. I went away that summer of 2001 and did my military training for doctors, lawyers, and chaplains in the military. You come as an officer, and you can do what they call commissioned officers training. So you get commissioned before you go in, whereas folks who do like officer training school, they have to finish our officer training school, then they get their commission. So it makes it a little bit different because you already walk in as a commissioned officer. And so it's the easiest way to get in. I mean, it was 5 weeks. There was a little bit of yelling in your head too. That was about it. Like, a little bit of mind games, nothing physical, that sort of thing. So that was, and I started med school in, like I said, August 2001. I'm studying for my very first block of exams on September 11th, 2000. So I'm in my apartment, living by myself, studying for this first set, because they do a whole block of exams at once. Studying for it, and Holly actually calls me. Because she was a nursing student at Jeff. And she was like, "Can you turn the TV on?" I was like, "I have." She'd like, "Turn it on." And so now, it's like, well, what does this mean for me? I just joined the active military.
Right.
And now all of a sudden, like, this obviously is going to lead to some sort of military action. And they just assured us, we've invested a lot of money in you getting trained as a physician. We're not pulling you out of there. You're not really trained to do anything else. Like, so you're going to be fine there. But the interesting thing was, one of the reasons when I joined the military was I call a bunch of docs, and they're like, this is a great deal. Like, I've been in the military. I've been deployed 15 years. They don't deploy docs. It's great. And now all of a sudden, like, everybody's
They're deploying.
And so, finished medical school. We got married in 2004. I graduated medical school in 2005. They stationed me out at Scott Air Force Base where it's in Mascoutah, Illinois. And that's where I did my residency, which is actually a residency program through St. Louis University. So I did a residency. It was joint between the Air Force and St. Louis University. Did my 3 years of residency. During your residency, you're not deployable. And then I owed them 4 years after residency. And God worked out that I could actually stay on as faculty at the program that I did residency at, so we didn't have to move.
Okay.
And then, so we stayed out there for those 4 years I owed. During that time, I did wind up getting deployed to Afghanistan for 6 months. So from September of 2010 to March of 2011, I was in Afghanistan. Nathan and John were born. Nathan doesn't remember being at all. He was born in 2009. So he's really young. John remembers a little bit. Holly really remembers.
Yeah.
Being a single mom of 2 bad young kids.
Oh.
What I was gonna.
And you were gone for how long again?
6 months.
6
And
months.
so she drove by herself back here over Christmas, stuff like that. Just 2 kids in diapers. Where she had only got like out of diapers. They go back here, but this.
We are not stopping every hour.
She's got brains.
Wow.
Yeah. I tell them that when we're on AV together. Like, you're going to be here a long time this morning. Put some diapers on. I know you're an adult now.
My experience in the Air Force as a physician was great. And I always recommend, people ask me a lot, I tell them, hey, because truthfully, I could separate from the Air Force at the age of 33, and I was debt free. And like anybody I went to medical school with, that's hundreds of thousands. She's 50 now. Everybody's still paying. It's a house. Did you remember actually it would pay off?
The pediatrician for my children is still paying.
Yeah.
Still. And he has adult kids now that are finishing. And he told them, do not go to school for medicine.
Well, the issue is, a lot of it is, because the interest rates are very high, a lot of them will just do they'll get as low as interest rate possible and then just pay off the very minimum. And they just it just stays. Yeah, I know a lot of them look and go, hey, if I die, usually student debt gets wiped out after time pass. It's like, if because otherwise, if you try to get aggressive to pay it off, it really can affect what you can do.
Over a lifetime.
So your house, no house.
Right.
So I always tell people the other 6.5 years that I was in the I did exactly what I'm doing now.
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't have to pick out my clothes in the morning. I got the word set thing. Yeah, like those 6 months in Afghanistan, the best thing I never want to do again. It was, and I kind of view that as payback.
Okay.
Otherwise it was great. It was a great.
Yeah. And you've never been deployed since? That's not
the reason why I separate. I enjoy it, but
what does it mean to separate?
it's just no longer.
No active duty. Okay.
Right. And so, go out and get a job in the civilian sector. But I'd have been home for 15 months and they're like, technically your bucket, they call them deployment buckets. Your bucket's backed up again. We'll try to protect you since you just went 15 months ago. That's not a very you're not confident.
Right.
And so I had an out. I'd served my required time. So we talked about it. I was like, nah, it's this time.
Okay.
I can't do that again.
Right.
And Ella had just been born around that time too. And it was like, all right, this is what I'm going to do this again.
Yeah.
And your motivation for joining was different anyway. It's not like you were going in there out of a 100% act of patriotism for what had just happened. You had already had plans,
But it did change a lot more patriotic after 9/11. Changed a lot of us that would cheer us out. But it did. Like at that point, going in initially it was all transactions.
it's just utility.
Yeah. It was just, this is a great deal financially. And, how bad could it be?
Yeah.
And it came out a lot better than I thought. And like I said, I really would encourage anybody who's thinking about it. In fact, he hasn't made a choice yet, but Nathan, my 16-year-old, he was already like, what do you think about ROTC for cops? It's a good idea. I think it's a great idea. And so, I was like, I'm here to help you if you have questions, and that sort of thing. So, yeah, I think it was a really, again, it's looking back how guided steps along the way. I mean, with the dentist issue in college and then just a random recruiter saying, hey, what do you think about this? And my dad going, hey, have you actually, and then my friend's dad saying, well, what about the Air Force over the Harley? and then all these,
God's just guiding you through every single step.
exactly. And then when we moved out to Illinois, then Africa, we looked around because we thought, oh, we'll just move back. The job market was a lot better in the Midwest at that point. And I was kind of a known commodity at that point because I had been out there for 7 years. And even though I was in the Air Force, I was practicing medicine in a civilian hospital, even though I was wearing the blue suit, as we called it. And so I knew all the docs in the area. So I wanted to, the best job opportunities were out there. So, praying about it, we're like, okay, I think this is where God wants us to be for now. Yeah. And so then, that turned out to be another 10 years that we stayed out there after I got out of the Air Force.
Wow.
So, anything exciting happened while you were over in Afghanistan, or was it just like I picture MASH?
Right. So
MASH was a show. Katrina.
I know what MASH is. I didn't watch it, of course. I'm too young for that, but my dad did.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Mark said we're almost 50. He and I are here.
The most of what I did over there, actually, I know this sounds like it's still actually technically classified, so I can't really go into detail. I know that's all right. So it was kind of funny though.
Now we really want to know. It's just it's us four. You can tell us. Nobody's ever gonna listen. And subscribe and follow. Yes.
Is that I got my initial deployment was supposed to be over there working at the hospital. Hey guys. And then I was supposed to go to Kuwait. And so I worked at a hospital in Kuwait. And so that was the deployment that I thought was going. Although I knew the guy that was at Kuwait at the time. He came from our practice. And he was like, he's like, I saw the list of people that are coming to be replacements and you're not on it. And I'm like, okay. It's like, I have orders, And then my parents came out to drive because Holly decided, you're going to leave. I'm going to go back to New Jersey for 6 weeks. The first 6 weeks are gone.
Mm-hmm.
So she leaves that morning. We say our goodbyes. I walk into work that day and they go, your appointment's canceled. She's in a car 90 miles east heading here. I call her, I'm like, my deployment's off. And she's like, do you want me to turn around? I'm like, no. I was like, just go. I was like,
I'm going golfing.
So then I wind up getting like a couple days later, you got a new task came, but we don't know what it is. It's with Special Forces.
Yeah.
That is not, again, I'm not brave. Right. I'm not talking. Like, I didn't join the military.
Right.
And they couldn't tell me.
Right.
And so and then I'm by myself.
Yeah.
And it was one of those moments. I'm not an anxious person, but it was definitely a moment of my life where anxiety overwhelmed to the point where Holly could hear my voice and she was calling friends of ours in Illinois. I need you to wellness check. Because I'm home by myself. My mind's going crazy. Like, what are they going to have me do? And it's nothing logical.
Right.
Like, they're not going to put me out there with SEAL Team 6. Right. Oh, okay. I would die within the first 8 seconds.
Marc McCleary, you're the only one for this job.
And so what it was really a struggle. Kind of say, okay, I turned it over to him. I did do that. I was completely out of my mind for a couple weeks.
So they told you have a classified assignment, but then they don't tell you what it is for a while?
Eventually, they told me enough to calm me down. Essentially, they said, you're going to be with this group, but you will not go outside somewhere off base, out into the fight area. Gotcha. Just don't be back. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's all I do. But that was enough to get me to
calm down.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I didn't really know what I was doing.
So that's how, okay. I don't know how any of that works. Okay. So sometimes you don't even know until you're there what you're going to be doing.
Because of the group I was with, a lot of times people would be able to call home once a week. I had a phone on my desk that I could call a home.
You're like 8
So it was, there was that connection. I was working nights over there, which is 11 and a half hour difference. So it's daytime here. So, Howie and I were taught 2 or 3 times a day. Oh. Yeah. And so a lot of these guys are lining up. Right. Trying to
get a phone call.
Really internet connection to make a connection.
Wow.
And so there was a lot of blessings along the way. Yeah. The experience itself, it was great to see that side. It did kind of make me more patriotic. see the brave young men there, but young men and they're out there protecting our country. It was really, because when you're in the medicine side of things, you know, like, you're around, we're not like,
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, we're just doing, we wear the uniform, but we're not a fighting force. And by the Geneva Convention, we're not combatants. Like, so if we were ever like taken technically as like a POW as a physician, or you're not, you know, you're not supposed to be held as a POW. You can be held as a non-combatant detainee, which they treat you saying it's all semantics, but technically you're not supposed, just like you're not supposed to bomb hospitals, all that stuff.
Right.
So
Wow.
Man.
You guys got more questions for him, or you want me to keep going?
I mean, yeah, but I guess we could move on to another topic.
No, keep going. I don't know. What do we care?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, I was just wondering, like, you know, you're in the military and, you know, you're a Christian. My brother-in-law is in the active military in the Marines. My friend is in the army in Germany. He's been to Kuwait before. I've had other family members in the army and stuff. And it's just kind of from everywhere, all walks of life. And so I'm kind of wondering what that experience, now you were obviously deployed for a short time, comparatively speaking, to other people. And so kind of what was that like, being a Christian, sort of in the field and sort of working your craft, but completely surrounded by essentially warfare,
right,
you know, and kind of living that life for a minute,
right,
you know, outside of the country.
right. And I think it was hard. You know, it's hard on several aspects. I mean, you're lonely. You know, the Air Force does, at least the Air Force that I was familiar with, the deployment is a little bit different than like the Army. Army would set like your entire squadron, you know, your entire group, your entire team. So you would deploy together. And so you would go over there, but you would be going over with the guys that you were like, hang on, balance.
Yeah. Some familiarity there. Yeah.
Air Force, at least on the medicine side of things, Air Force, they would just send you by yourself.
Mm.
So literally, I show up at the airport.
Is that just because of like a shortage? Oh,
No,
Yeah. What?
the way it's set up, it may be that way in medicine, all the practices. I don't know.
Okay.
I've always been the Air Force, but the Air Force deployments for the non-docs were a lot like that, right? So you get there. I did go to Fort Bragg, which I now think is Fort Liberty, in North Carolina for a couple of weeks of the deployment training, and that's kind of where I found out what I was going to be doing when I was over there. And then you meet your team, but these guys are all from all over
Different places.
like next. And so we get together and we bonded for the 2 weeks we were there till we went over to Afghanistan. And then they went all over the country. It's kind of reported back to me over email or telephone, things like that. And so, but even then, like, you're traveling by yourself. So there's that level of loneliness. You're like, you don't have anybody I would be down. And then there's the spiritual loneliness, because when you get there, there's a chaplain there, but like they're off doing their thing. There's really no, I mean, it was 6 months of like really no Christian fellowship.
Okay. I was just going to say, did they have any kind of church presence at all?
Not really. I mean, there were some Bible studies, but again,
Mm-hmm.
they were doing that. My time required me to work nights.
Right.
So I don't really believe anything had messed up. I was sleeping. All that stuff was going on.
Right.
And a lot of times the chaplains in the military, some of them are born again Christians, but they really are like kind of like almost any religion kind of chaplain, right? They have to fit. They have to be there for everybody.
Okay.
And so, you know, the chaplain you had may not be somebody who's, you know, like-minded, may not be a brother of Christ or sister of Christ. It could be, you know, and again, they're going to be very like sensitive to your, for that their term, religious viewpoint, but I mean, they may not be shared on so that, yeah, having fellowship.
Yeah.
Right.
And so yeah, I mean, it was definitely 6 months of like, I remember coming home and say, man, I miss church.
Mm-hmm.
And it, honestly, like, I probably took it for granted before. I thought, well,
Sure.
we're always like, oh, it's
Like 99% people.
Put it together. Yeah.
and so we're going to call it because this was,
Right.
and then when you don't have, oh man, this really my spirit is
Yeah.
not okay.
Mm.
You know, and so it was definitely one of those things where, yeah, it's tough. Yeah, it was definitely a in some regards spiritual desert, but also the one where you're like, I have a lot of time alone
Mm-hmm.
with the Lord, so like, you know, work on me.
Right.
Did you meet other Christians while you were there?
Not when I was deployed.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it was a small niche of people I was with, and
Mm-hmm.
as far as our conversations would go,
Nothing told you. Yeah.
Business, probably.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of churches, I think we'll take a break and you can actually hear about our church. So we're going to break. We'll be right back. Yeah, I'm the best at segues.
Okay.
Hey. We'll be right back.
Welcome to Emmanuel Baptist Church, where our focus has been building strong lives in Jesus Christ since 1925, right here in Maple Shade, New Jersey. With 2 Sunday services at 9 a.m. and 11 a.m., you can choose the time that works best for you. And if you have children, our Greenhouse Kids Ministry and Nursery are available during the 11 a.m. service, so you can worship without distractions. But that's not all. On Sunday mornings at 10 a.m., we offer Sunday school classes for all ages. And if you're looking for a midweek pick-me-up, we have a variety of events on Wednesday nights. For more information on all of our programs and events, visit our website at ibclife.org. Follow us on social media and check out our weekly bulletin. And there's one more way to stay connected with us. Download our Church Center app. With this convenient app, you can stay up to date on all of our events and register for programs. Emmanuel Baptist Church, building strong lives in Jesus Christ.
Okay, we're back.
Okay.
We're back.
Right.
Okay, we're here with Dr. Marc McCleary. We just discussed his early life. Now, go ahead. Ask a question.
So
I got nothing.
you're from New Jersey, Williamstown. You go to Illinois. You do all your things there. You come back. Why?
I think, it was one of those.
I came back recently.
Yeah, I came back in 2022.
Okay.
We had no family out.
Okay.
So, we moved out there. It was just Holly and I. 17 years later, we have 4 kids. But all of our family was back here.
Yeah.
And, they were coming out and visiting and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But, we were still seeing family 2 times, maybe 3 times a year max.
Right. It's not a lot.
No. And our kids really didn't know their grandparents well.
Mm-hmm.
They would visit them, and it was always a special time, exciting time.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same point in time, you're out there. We had a great friend group. Some of our dearest friends are still the folks out in Illinois. But they, it's still not family,
Right.
and so if something comes up, it's you have to rely on friends. Middle of the night ER trip, hard to come be with the kids.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Thankfully, we didn't have any of those.
Mm-hmm.
But even having babies 2, 3, and 4.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Who's staying with the first one?
Oh, yeah.
Because they weren't scheduled, so it wasn't like we family members coming out before it. None of them, for any of the births, none of our family went out for any of it.
Oh,
So it was one of those things where it was we had great friends who would were on call and we're hey, yeah, can you come over? You'll be kids, so we can get in there.
No.
So anyway, so those little things, and then it was interesting because God was kind of working both Holly and I's heart over the last few years before we moved. But we really weren't talking about it. We had talked about it a couple of years before, but I don't think either one of us were ready.
Because you were involved in church there.
Right, we were involved in church, and everything was going, and that's what our kids knew.
Right.
That was their home.
And they were in school.
They were in school. They were in public school.
And they liked it. Didn't you say you had a good experience with public school there? Because here they go
to
Christians.
Yeah. So we did have a good experience with public school overall.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't a very robust Christian school dynamic there.
Okay.
And how I talked about homeschooling, and I think either one of us felt called. So don't we listen to your podcast, and I think for people who are called to do it, it's amazing.
Sure.
But for us, that was just never something we felt
Mm-hmm.
called to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was, but our oldest had just completed his freshman year of high school when we moved back. And, again, you start getting into public high school, then there's some more exposures and some
Sure, yeah.
besides just the philosophy of the education itself, just in general. So, yeah.
spiritual interactions.
And then we talk about our parents getting older and the fact that, there's going to be, we need to be available.
Yeah.
I have my siblings.
Now, does Holly have a big family around here?
3.
Okay. And you were,
Her brother lives in the area, but her sister lives in like Virginia.
yes.
4 hours away.
Right.
And then I live on it. Let's go. So we had actually, interestingly, we had decided, okay, I'm gonna get my medical license in New Jersey. I'm gonna start looking.
Okay.
Because the other thing is with our oldest, we really didn't want to move if we were gonna move right before senior year.
Okay. Okay.
And we didn't really want to move after he graduated because then if we move back here, he has got no home base here. Oh, we're here. His home base is to be Illinois. So what if you do when he's home a break from college? Is he, like, he's not going to come here.
Right.
He's going to go. Yeah. So we wanted to get it. So it was like, it's got to be either before sophomore year or before junior year. Like that. It's going to be the next year.
And before you moved back here and when you were in Illinois, what were you doing as a doctor? Was he working?
The family medicine. I had a clinic. I was getting involved in administration. I was a medical director for a region as well. And so kind of going both clinical and administrative and really enjoying myself professionally at it. It was a great practice. It was actually one of the hardest decisions to make for me to move back was professional. It was like things were going great professionally. Personally, they weren't bad, but there was so much opportunity here from a personal perspective. So I think how and I weren't discussing it really, and then also we came together and we're like, we've both been feeling the same. So it's like, okay, this is the moment that we need to do this. That's why right around the time we had this conversation, my dad had a massive heart attack. And he survived. But then it was like drawing even more like, okay, look,
we need to go. We need to be able to support our family. Yeah.
And then we had already decided that we were going to make the move. I'd already accepted the job that I currently have. And then my dad passed suddenly. So we had not told my parents, I live our parents, so we were moved back yet. And when I was back with my mom, when we were preparing for my dad's funeral, I told her, I said, we're moving back. Like I took a job.
Oh, was she just?
And she was like, and I could tell that she was relieved, but like,
Yeah.
we're not doing that for me. I was like, actually, we made this decision.
We already did it. Yeah, we did it for us
We made this
too. Yeah.
what has happened. But it's all the more important now.
Wow.
We're back.
Yeah.
And then we moved back, and it was when the first we moved back that how his mom had some freaking life-threatening medical problems.
Right.
And I can only imagine what that would have been like for Holly to be 1,000 miles.
Right.
And all that.
Oh yeah.
So, I mean, it was definitely God moving and saying, it's time to go back. Got a chance to put our kids in Christian school. And you know, that was a rough discussion.
Okay.
Yeah.
I told them that we were moving, and because this was their life. And we told them, it was a Saturday night, we told them, they bawled. Like they would just like melted down. Right. It was like, oh my gosh, this is all right. And, you know, a year later, we revisited that. No, we were bad. We did. Right. But, you know, so yeah, it's good deal, you know.
Right.
And I mean, yeah, I mean, the only bad thing that's come out of it is, you know, my little still Cardinals fan, but other
Some might blame you.
You win some, you lose some, Mark. Okay, I think you're doing pretty well.
Yeah. That's not baseball heaven, like they say.
I'm the least sports knowledge person you'll ever meet. I'm
So you
fine.
the St. Louis Cardinals are a team in St. Louis.
I'm asleep.
Yeah. Done.
Okay, so now you've got your kids. Sorry, go ahead.
No.
Now you've got your kids in Christian school. You've moved. You know that this is the right thing to do. So how's it been so far for them? You've got one about to go to college.
Right. So my oldest John's graduating this year. He's gonna head down to Liberty University. Oh, and super excited about that. And again, I think you know, the public school, bigger environment. Sure. Christian school, smaller environment. Shows you a little bit more opportunity, especially like sports wise and things like that. Whereas it's been a little bit more difficult for them to play sports. You know, at the public school. I mean, I think some of them may have been able to, but it would have been a little bit more challenging.
Yeah.
And so this gives you that opportunity. It also gives an opportunity to get an education from Christian worldview. Right. Which they certainly worth getting.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, not to replay the podcast you guys already had. I mean, some of the, like, there was some opportunities academically, musically, things like that in public school that
You don't get.
yeah, can get.
Yes.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But
I've seen them plugged into a manual like a lot.
yeah, exactly. So then that's the thing is, you know, the church gives an opportunity to play, and they were involved in the church that we were at in Illinois. We had a wonderful church family there. But yeah, so it was nice to be able to come back, and and be able to worship with family.
Mm-hmm.
So basically,
Yeah.
like that. So,
Right.
Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah.
So now you have your own practice in Cinnaminson
yeah, I work for virtual.
for Virtua.
Yeah.
How's that going? Like,
good.
and you said you were having success out there.
Yeah,
Here.
I think professionally, it was probably a little bit of a step back. Just because like I said, I was an associate medical director. I had some administrative responsibility. I think I had some decisions to make. If I would have stayed out there about how much administrative I wanted to do and whether I want to phase out or phase back off the clinical side of things and go more administrative. I take some extra classes to get some certifications for administration. I enjoy that aspect of it in some regards. Medicine, no matter what field you're in, this might sound bad, can get a little bit mundane. It's just everything all the time, right? It's like, okay, this person got hypertension. Here are the 3 veg you use for that. This is the order you use them in. This person's got diabetes. This is the thing we had. So you just wind up.
Do you enjoy that?
I do the relationships.
Yeah.
The medicine of it, when you do it long enough, it does become a little bit reflexive. You have to fight that because you don't want to miss something because,
Yeah.
okay, this is what I've seen in the movie past, what it is. And there might be something slightly different and you miss it because you're just automatically assuming it.
You're just doing the checklist, you know.
And so the thing about the administrative side was it was a lot of playing out fires, but it made you sit there and think because it's like, all right, I have to bout these people's personalities for this decision and all this stuff. And so it made you kind of use that like social IQ a little bit more. And I think I enjoyed the aspect because it got the thing that drew me to medicine. This substituted for it because medicine, again, if you're doing your field, it gets a little bit repetitive,
Right.
no matter what field you're in. And I think medicine is actually one of the least repetitive fields because anything could walk in the
Yeah.
door. Sure. It's true. So the highly specialized people who see every patient's coming in and see heart failure. And so, and so I don't have that, but you still have, your 90% of the stuff's the same.
So you enjoy kind of like that broad, anything could come in the door and we'll see what happens? Or
I do.
if you were to replay it back, would you be like, man, if I could have just been specialized in this thing, become an expert in that?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm okay with being kind of jack of all trades, master of none. A lot of people aren't.
Yeah.
It's funny because I remember I struggled a little bit when I chose family medicine because from an ego standpoint, it's not as prestigious as some other fields. And I did okay in school. Like I could have gone into other areas, but I felt called to go to family medicine. And I remember I still struggled with it. And I had some friends who were like, I can't believe you're going to family medicine like this. And I'm like, but for whatever reason, I feel called to it. We were talking to a neonatologist who was like world renowned in her field. And she was like, I could never do it. So what do you mean? She's like, I could never know all the stuff you need to know to be a primary care doctor. She's like, I need to know one thing and know it all about it.
Right.
And she's like, it's a gift to not need to do that. She's like, it's a gift to need that. She's like, that's why we need people.
Right.
To do that. And so I was like, okay. It made me feel. And she was a believer, and she actually, I ran her at a Christian medical group thing that we had in Penn School, and so she was like kind of a mentor in that regard for me for that. It was like, this is like one of the most famous neonatologists.
Wow.
Again, I mean, it's not like that field that a lot of people know but I mean in that field.
I don't even know what they do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I hear. Thanks for asking. Yeah, I was sitting here like, I'm going to ask him exactly what that is because I have no clue. Yeah.
I know it.
Yeah, she is experienced.
And they have a lot to learn too. They do a lot. They do a lot of work. Yeah.
Right.
So, being a Christian and being a doctor, do you ever come against stuff that maybe morally you don't agree with, or like I mean, I'm not getting like super like, what's your view on euthanasia? But something like that.
It's a good question because there's a lot of gray, and when you're raised in a Christian environment, especially a conservative Christian environment, you kind of thought everything is black and white. And again, I'm not saying that I'm not kind of taking a relativistic approach that like, everything is relative and if it's right for you, it's right. No, there's right and wrong. Absolutely. But there's some areas, especially when you get into technology, I get into medicine where you're like, what is wrong? And I know that this got touched on when you guys were doing the podcast on the chaplaincy.
Okay.
I listened to your podcast.
See, you wouldn't have known chaplains here had he not listened.
I asked for these, and Pastor Craig go as a representative of the police force.
Right.
They have to be a representative of the police force and not a band or pastor church. So they may handle somebody differently. right?
I
So,
see.
for instance, if somebody's coming to me and they're Muslim and they're coming to me for medical advice on Ramadan, I have to give them medical advice on Ramadan. This I need to help them while they practice their faith.
Yeah.
And yet, that doesn't mean that I'm saying I think that that
Go Ramadan.
not that I'm being a proponent of Islam as the correct religion.
Right.
I'm being a proponent of this person has every right to press.
Right.
Right.
And also your task is to keep them healthy.
Yeah.
What's my job?
Yeah.
Right. Correct.
Right.
It's so I think for me it's where does the line happen? The line happens when I have to do something that I would find me personally unethical, not them being unethical. If they choose that, for instance, a teenage girl comes to me and asks me for birth certificate, I'll prescribe it.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean that I'm saying that I think you should do this. In fact, I'll say, the only truly way to prevent pregnancy is abstinence. You can still get diseases, all those sorts of things. Like I'm giving them all the medical because that's what they're paying me. That's what they're getting to see me.
Right.
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 I'm not their father. I'm gonna have a different discussion about my daughter. I swear,
Yeah.
but for them, I'm going to prescribe because I don't think that I'm like violating any sort of ethics. Like this is your choice. Right. Now, if they come to me for the morning after pill, I can't prescribe it because at that point, my pain. Right. But I actually worked with the leading providers who would not prescribe oral birth control. They felt convicted about it.
Wow.
Absolutely. They don't do it.
And they're allowed to not. I mean, obviously. Yeah. But
I worked for a Catholic health organization when I was for 10 years. They Catholics generate or anti kind of stuff.
sure. Right.
So, but they could not tell physicians or nurse practitioners or PAs what they could prescribe for high closed doors. What you do with your patient with high closed doors is not their business. But they could tell the staff, like the medical assistants, people who check you in, you're not allowed to give a depot shot because that would violate. But it's the physician decides that's what's best interest for them, and the physician gives it. That's not our business.
Wow.
But to get this whole story that I think kind of highlights the murkiness that can happen. is I'm as pro-life as you get, okay? Because of conception.
Right.
And so again, I say it not judgmentally. I understand people have gone through horrible things and they made decisions. I'm not here to say. I'm just saying, me personally, that's my fear. So I'm doing OB at the beginning of my career. At family medicine, full scope, we do OB. I'm covering the labor deck. Woman comes in, and I tell this story with some sensitivity because I know there's some people listening to this who may have lost a pregnancy. And so I understand the pain. So this woman comes in, she's 19 to 20 weeks pregnant. True viability of a pregnancy starts about 23 weeks. If you have a baby at 23 weeks, they may be able to save it. Lung development doesn't really happen until about 23 weeks. So anything short of 23 weeks, there's no lungs. So there's literally no viability for the baby. So the woman comes in and she's leaking amniotic fluid. So essentially her water broke. Right. Now it's not gushing, it's a trickle, but still. And so the rule of thumb is when somebody's water breaks, you have to deliver the baby within 24 hours. Because once the water breaks, if you don't deliver the baby in 24 hours, infection's going to set. Right. And essentially, or get septic and infected. So when that happens at 19 and a half weeks, essentially it's a miscarriage, right? So I don't want this woman to get infected.
Right.
You've proven that the fluid is true amniotic fluid she's leaking. The baby's heart is still beating, but at the same point in time, it's a done deal. Not stop.
Yeah.
So I write the order to induce labor. Okay. It's a Catholic hospital. Out of the flag. And all of a sudden, I get pulled before emergency ethics committee that I just ordered an abortion.
Then and there?
Right. But they convened it immediately.
Wow.
And I said, well, I would never do that. Like this.
Yes.
This is literally, and they said, no, based on the hospital guidelines, if the mom's life is not in imminent danger, you cannot induce pregnancy in the situation. I said, but what's the definition of her life being in imminent danger?
Right.
She's actively septic.
So she had to become septic.
Before they were okay. And so they've canceled my order and said that this was in violation of the hospital ethics. So now, thankfully, and that sounds harsh, but thankfully, she spontaneously delivered the baby like 2 hours later. And so it never got to that.
Yeah.
And that was another issue altogether because it was probably the worst experience of my medical career. That the dad comes in, the baby is, tiny, but the chest is moving because heart is beating. So he thinks the baby's breathing, and we're doing it. He's like, but we're not resuscitating because there's nothing to resuscitate. And so he's screaming, like, resuscitate the baby, and we're like, we had the neonatologist there, we can't, there's nothing we could do. And so it was super, like, stressful. But I tell that more about the murkiness, right? Is that what was right or wrong? Here I am thinking I'm about as concerned as you can get on that area. And I'll have a hospital ethics committee saying, no, you're trying to abort this baby. Right. And I'm like, I'm not.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And so that's where you start going, boy, there is some gray.
Yeah.
There is some gray. And it's
so you let the mother go septic, and then you deliver the baby, and now you're trying to get the mother.
Right. That's essentially what they would want.
You're backpedaling to get her back to where I was.
Exactly. So it would be a baby. And again, this is one of those things where somebody says, oh, we did this genetic testing, and the baby has this condition that's not compatible with a long life. And, those of us who are pro-life would say, well, I still wouldn't think it's okay to end their pregnancy, right? You just kind of let it play. So, but then all of a sudden for me, in that situation, it was okay.
Right.
Right. And so was it right or wrong? No. And so that's really where you run into those gray areas where, like, I didn't even think about it until the ethics committee convened, and I'm like, so even after the fact, I'm like, I still think I was okay.
Now you're questioning yourself.
But thankfully, like I said, in that scenario, it didn't come to the mother. Yeah. But I mean, it wasn't thankful in the fact that it was awful situation because the baby was lost. But in my opinion, the baby was lost before that.
Yes.
Once the amniotic fluids are leaking, it was essentially she hadn't delivered. Right? It just hadn't actively happened yet. And so, but yeah, I mean, it is those are those really murky areas. Whether it be LGBTQ medicine, right? It's not my job when they come in asking me for medical advice. They're not asking me for a sermon or
for a life lesson,
right? They're asking me for medical advice, and so I have to ethically give them the right medical advice.
Yeah.
And I've had occasionally a couple of patients.
I was just going to ask, have you had
actually
that happen?
What my personal opinion is, or
and you're allowed to.
That's my personal opinion is they are, and then for certain areas, when it comes to sharing your faith, like, again, I have to be careful because, again, my job is not to be an evangelist in the room, right? But my job is still to represent Christ. So how do you do that without being and so a lot of these people come in with, again, your podcast on mental health, depression, right? I mean, very real things, right? But one of the things I do say, not to overly simplify depression and mental health, but a lot of times I will say, do you have a support group like a church? Right? And try to start the conversation that way, right? And say, hey, that can be helpful. Not saying that alone, because, again, as a medical professional, I have to offer other modalities, but I want to make sure, or people come in with drug issues, alcohol issues, those sorts of things. Do you have a support group, church, those sorts of things? How are you, how's your, those, so bring up the conversation that way.
Right.
And sometimes that will spark conversation. But yeah, so I think that's kind of how, you have to do it, because, I mean, again, I have to treat every patient, regardless of if they're behaving in a way I don't agree with, from a moral standpoint. That's really not, for lack of a term, that's not my business, in so much that it doesn't affect them medically, right? And so, as a human being that cares, as somebody who wants people to come to Christ, I care. But in that role, I have to look at them as, what are you here for? I have to make sure that I view that first. And if I can find ways to be an encouragement from a spiritual perspective, then absolutely you take those.
Right.
But, it's funny, because I had a ton of Muslim patients, and a couple of imams that are my patients, and we get along great. We'll talk, but they a lot of them come in and you say, I'm sending my congregation to you because they're all doing Hajj, going to Mecca. So they did, because I was helping them get their shots together and all their stuff that they need to go to Mecca. So all of a sudden now I'm like the diet.
Right.
It's one of those things where it's
Well, it's not like you've ever been to Jerusalem during Ramadan.
Right.
see again those kind of issues. I think, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of gray areas, where you have to know, or you walk out of the room going, the only thing that's going to help that person is Jesus. I mean, yeah, and then, but I can't necessarily say that at that point.
No, but I can imagine you're leaning on God's grace and love a lot, I think, in your profession. My personality, it's why God didn't put me in medicine, because I'm so, I was raised similarly, to you, and I'm not sure I've quite gotten away of how much things are either black or white or gray. And it's like a daily thing. And I think for you, talking about sort of your whole trajectory and path, like God has put you in certain spots along the way and like built your heart and your mind to do exactly what you're doing today the best possible way you could as a human with his help, and I know he would do it for anybody. It's just,
It's interesting because one thing that's really become apparent as I've gone along is a lot more of the humility of, but for the grace of God, that could be me.
Right.
Again, I'm not talking about diseases, diabetes, hypertension, all those things that I see. It's a lot of what I see is people that have made poor choices that have spiraled on them.
Okay.
And they're, now they're dealing with mental,
finding ramifications from all those decisions.
and go, it's easy to, that was stupid. Why'd you do that?
Yeah.
And then you go, wait a minute, I was blessed, raised in a Christian home, raised in a stable home, raised in a situation where, I was able to not have, I had things patterned for me in a way that were the way that they should have been patterned for me. Was, the dentist thing I said at the beginning with Holly, and then the same thing having her up. And so all of a sudden going, how in the world I could look down at this person?
Right.
Because that can have easily been, back to our conversation over the break about, like total depravity, right? And the idea that we're depraved like anybody else, unbuttoned. So how in the world am I going to sit there and be like, you got exactly what you deserve? All right. No, I haven't gotten anything that I did.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so keeping that in mind does help with that. And that was not me in college. College Mark, College Mark was a jerk, and he was very much the flip down.
So was College Steve. It's bad.
Oh, you call yourself a Christian? That's not what Christians are. And that's, and all those sorts of things. And you realize, my goodness, like I missed the point, and the funny thing is my personal standards aren't any different now than they were probably when I was in college. Right. But the grace at which I look at others is completely different because when you get exposed to that, it's hard to not.
And when you don't really have answers, I don't think. When you're at a loss, you're like, oof.
Yeah, no, I mean, sometimes you just listen. You walk out of the room and you go, that was heady.
Right.
Yeah.
That was heady. I don't know how, there's no pill for that. There's nothing for that. There needs to be a changed heart and personal forgiveness and, heavenly forgive, all those things, right?
Yeah.
And so it definitely had been, it's humbling. I always say, being a physician, stereotypically, all you guys are all arrogant, whatever. Honestly, the longer you practice medicine, the more humble you should be because the more you're exposed to the fact that you just don't know that one.
Yeah.
Constantly being exposed to things like, I can't help this person. And I used to tell people when they would start off when I was doing faculty and teaching residents, like, you can't wear every patient on your sleeve or in brown. Like, you need to care, but there's going to be so many patients you can't help, whether it be emotionally, spiritually, physically, any of those things. Yeah. And if you walk in thinking, then come in, I'm going to help them. And sometimes all you can do is listen, but sometimes that's all they need. Yeah. They're coming in just to say, hey, thanks for listening.
Yeah.
I didn't do anything for you. I just need you.
Well, speaking of listening, great at segues. Would we be able to have you back another time? Because we have reached the end and hopefully everybody's still listening because I'm intrigued and I would love to have you again. Cool. Yeah. I know you've never listened to the podcast before because you've never mentioned it. He plugged it so much. No, he plugged it so much. He just didn't say follow and subscribe. That's all. See, there's that doctor voice.
There you go.
This is what I hear when I go into his office because he's my doctor. And
Yeah. He said,
You are my patient.
yeah, I'll just blow me off. You're like, you're fine, whatever. I don't even care. Checklist.
This is what I was talking about when I said it was.
Yeah. And you need Jesus. We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us.